Today on Operation Domination, we have George Pickens getting traded to the Dallas Cowboys and all the reactions for that, along with our tiered risers and fallers heading into the 2025 season. All that and more right here on Operation Domination.
Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Tired of
Dowhouse,
hearing about disappointments in fantasy this season.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Well, welcome back in Operation Domination. Once again, I'm your host, Dan Mader, joined with the full crew today, Chase Thornton, Christy, and Adam LaRue. So we got a nice little action-packed news drop early this morning, which is always fun in May. But of
Jerry
course,
didn't lie.
Yeah, Jerry did not lie. He was going to go after somebody. He decided Jonathan Mingo is not good enough to be a starting wide receiver. Thank God. Something was clicking in his head at least a little bit. But yeah, so let's dive right into that. So Adam, let me get your reaction to this first. I mean, George Pickens, he gets traded for a third and a sixth. Or no, I'm sorry, a third and a fifth, and a sixth went back to Dallas along with George Pickens. So let me get your reaction to this trade.
Yeah, we have continued the exodus of homegrown wide receivers from Pittsburgh. So that was kind of my first thought. Leading into the Dallas side, I do think it's an interesting addition for them. I mean, they were super bare at wide receiver behind CD, and I know from a fantasy perspective, we were kind of excited about that. But from an NFL perspective, that was kind of fixing to be pretty ugly. I think this is ultimately going to be, good for Dak, good for the Cowboys, and probably good for, not CD's fantasy upside, but from an NFL perspective, from not being like crazy hyper targeted, probably going to be good for his health. So fantasy perspective, slight dip on CD. I think it's big for Dak. I think that this is probably a little bit better for Pickens and for the Pittsburgh side of things. I mean, we that situation is still so hard to gauge without knowing what's going on at quarterback. But good for DK to not have that overlap on a deep down the field type of receiver.
Well, is it really a slip for CeeDee Lamb? I mean, I know we used to joke all the time about CeeDee Lamb going for 200 targets, but frankly, another receiver where he doesn't have to get bracketed coverage and maybe can be more efficient as a result, he's still going to be a highly targeted wide receiver. I don't know. I mean, Chris, what's your reaction to that?
I think he's more explosive as a result of this. Dan, as you kind of alluded to, you get less attention. You're not going to get 6 and 7 yard passes consistently. Maybe actually down the field a little bit. See some safeties that are outside on the taking Pickens away. Maybe Ferguson should be healthy as well. So I think there's a lot of things. And you add Jaden Blue in the backfield. I think you have a lot of weapons on this team where you could actually not pay attention as much as CD, and I think that will benefit him. Where maybe to see yards per catch go up. Don't forget, CD Lamb's a highly explosive player, so I think gets kind of. He's not one of those guys who's just a PPR machine. This guy can do things with less. So I do think, again, it can kind of balance itself out.
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about it, too. I mean, we don't need guys to get hyper-target to be super great. I mean, I think CeeDee Lamb's still going to get around that 30% target mark at the end of the day. And this Cowboy team, I think I've mentioned this before, there's apparently still a narrative out there. I don't know if anybody's just not been looking at data for the past few seasons, but there's still this narrative out there that Brian Schottenheimer just wants to run the ball. This team's not built for running. He's not a run-first coach anymore. It's not what he does. Now, it's a conservative passing a game. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to go air it out, get vertical, get creative like an Andy Reid. But he does favor the pass now at 67% more times than not when he's been the offensive play caller over the past few seasons. I'm not counting Dallas. I'm going back to Seattle when he truly was the play caller there for that instance. And when you look at the backfield of Chris, you mentioned Jadon Blue. I mean, we'll see how much he's going to play right away, but they signed Javonte Williams. They brought in Miles Sanders. It's a lot of guys that we don't know how much they can even produce, right? And Jadon Blue maybe being the most electric of them is a pass catcher. But Chase, if you flip to the other side here, and we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, DK Metcalf now doesn't have the huge target share, or I shouldn't say the huge target share to go around to his teammates because it wasn't going to be that big, but he doesn't have to worry about siphoning off targets to Pickens. And I guess because we talked about it, the difference in my mind between DK Metcalf and CeeDee Lamb, why I don't think it's a downgrade for Lamb to get more target competition, but it is an upgrade for DK Metcalf to lose it, is because, well, there's not that many targets to go around the Pittsburgh offense to begin with. I don't know. Just give me a reaction on the Pittsburgh side of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're still dealing with Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh, but yeah, DK now is the unquestioned number one target on that team. There's no Pickens to have to worry about there. You know, I don't mind this move. I don't mind this move for either one of them, for Pickens or for Metcalf. Like I said, with Pickens gone, Metcalf now can be that number one target. They can funnel him stuff. I'm interested to see now who does become that secondary target. Other than Pat Freiermuth, is it going to be Calvin Austin? Is it going to be Roman Wilson last year? Do they still bring somebody else in? But you know, I'm wondering too, though, you know, with Pickens, do we actually see him be a more effective football player since he's now playing the number 2 role, what we assume is the number 2 role down in Dallas? You know, there's still a lot of questions in Pittsburgh. They're still dealing with Arthur Smith. We still don't know who's really throwing them the football. We all kind of assume it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. This is not the same offensive personnel that they had last year. This is going to be a vastly different looking offense, even though it's still going to be an Arthur Smith offense. But yeah, this makes me a little more optimistic maybe for DK Metcalf whenever they do finally figure out who the quarterback.
Well, it does one thing. It makes sure that Arthur Smith only has one guy that he's allowed to target. And if he only has one guy he's allowed to target, then maybe there's a chance, even though he still has not had a wide receiver finish better than wide receiver 41 since A.J. Brown in 2020. And Chris, you're putting your thumb up. You have something to add to that?
I just keep pushing, trying to put direct to Adam, because Adam's boy is the one who's supposedly get the benefit of the doubt here, where they're they're raving about how Roman Wilson looks like a completely different player out there, and Roman Wilson's going to be that guy that they expect to step up to kind of fill that secondary role. And we've seen that second receiver, especially if they're shorter. Arthur Smith, as Chase talked about, loves to target those kind of guys for some reason.
It does. It has to, but they paid DK Metcalf. They made the trade for DK Metcalf. I had to think there's going to come from the top. This is who you focus on first before you go to anybody else. Let's real quickly, let's tackle this hypothetical. What if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign with Pittsburgh? What if he just retires? Or just go somewhere else? Whatever the case may be. Adam, what if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign with Pittsburgh? What happens then?
You'd feel really not good about the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, there's options that you can come up with, like Wentz, for example, wouldn't be the craziest one in the world. But boy, that quarterback room as it stands today is really, really ugly. I think DK will at least be playable. I don't want to say no matter what, but in most realities. But the rest of that room and the rest of that offense in general can get really dicey really fast depending on how things go.
I mean, DK Metcalf himself hasn't finished better than a wide receiver 24 since 2020. Like, he hasn't finished top 12. Like, he's been more of a low-end wide receiver 2. Not great offenses, but better offenses and better quarterback play. Not great quarterback play. So it's a tough situation. I think that's why it was big for me. All right, Pickens gets out of there. Here's what I would say. DK Metcalf is safe floor wide receiver 24. You guys agree or disagree with that based on where the volume should go?
I agree.
Yep.
Agree? Yeah. Okay. So I think that's the difference there. Where before I was like, Metcalf might be a wide receiver 3 with this offense, depending upon what happens. But we do have a ton of top tier risers and fallers to get into. We're going to go to different tiers here. So let's get into our top one.
And we're going to start off. These are our dynasty risers and fallers. We're going to separate them out by tiers. We're going to start off with the top tier guys. And for us, all of our risers were quarterbacks. So we're definitely had a bit of bias there. Dan, I'm going to kick it to you to start us off. Who's your riser?
So my riser was Justin Herbert. Okay. It shouldn't be that surprising to people, but I do think people are still sleeping on how good Trey Harris is. So I do find like Justin Herbert still kind of outside that top 10 right now, consensus wise. You add Trey Harris as a perfect complement to Ladd McConkey. I think everybody agrees is a much established weapon. Their offensive line is full of young, really good talent. They underachieved a little bit last year. That O-line could be one of the top 3 offensive lines in NFL. You were surprised what you got out of J.K. Dobbins last year in the running game, frankly, being what you were running with. But now you address that issue with you drafted Omarion Hampton and you signed Najee Harris. So no matter what, the backfield's been upgraded too as a result of this. He has weapons everywhere. And here's the best part about all this. Greg Roman showed me last season, the second half of last season, that he actually can build a 21st century offense. I didn't think that was necessarily possible, but he was, in fact, able to do that. In fact, from weeks 8 through 18, Justin Herbert was quarterback 5. Like he was the dominant quarterback in the second half of the season when they actually went out to go throw the ball. He was 26 in dropback attempts weeks 1 through 7, and then he was 5th week 8 through 18. So the volume ticked up there, and now they have the weapons to boot with it. So to me, everything's pointing up for him. And I just wanted to add one more thing in here. He led all quarterbacks who had at least 100 dropbacks last season in completion percentage, 75 adjusted completion percentage, so 75.7%. So he's accurate. He was third in completion percentage over expected. He was getting volume in a Greg Roman offense, and they have more weapons and a great offensive line. Everything's pointing up. I'm going to have him as top 8 quarterback heading into the season.
Yeah, no, I definitely tend to agree with Justin Herbert as a riser. I've been grabbing Trey Harris all over the place, to your dismay, one of our leagues. So definitely with you in my excitement for that offense. I'm going to keep it in the division for someone who I think for the first time since his rookie year might sneak into being a value, and that's Patrick Mahomes. Look, not the best last couple of seasons for Patrick Mahomes. But I do really like the Tooney trade when it first happened. Not my favorite, but since then, I've liked this offseason for the Chiefs. I had a day 2 grade on the receiver that they got in the draft, and I was really excited to see them get Josh Simmons. I think that they've otherwise addressed the tackle position, and they've done so without really getting anything extra at the running back position, where they did struggle towards the tail end of the season. Now, trend-wise, what was exciting was we saw he didn't throw the ball a ton last season. However, definitely skewed towards the back half once Pacheco got hurt. For example, if you were to extrapolate his pass attempts from week 8 until the end of the regular season, he would have actually had his highest pass attempts for his career. Now, not to say that, they have Pacheco back. We don't know what he is going to be healthy, but I don't think he's going to have the highest pass attempts of his career by any means. But I don't know that they're going to be the run first, try to win through defense team they were to start the season last season either. I also think that the way the Eagles hit them in the mouth, I just don't think that they can afford to be that type of team anymore. I think that they have to go back to what made them successful in the first place a little bit. So I'm putting my trust into Patrick Mahomes, who is now, for the first time since his breakout, falling out of startup first rounds, by the way, is QB6. Just someone who, is kind of sliding outside of that top elite group. And I don't know if maybe that's a little bit early, especially, like I said, getting Josh Simmons, getting some extra help, getting all of his wide receivers we were so excited for last season back. So I'm hopeful and, pretty confident that Mahomes can at least return a little bit of value again for the first time in what feels like a while.
So who's next?
Chris, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so this guy I think was already trending going into the draft, but I think he continues to trend forward, and that for me is Caleb Williams. People have been all over the place. Everybody's pissed off that I think the Bears should have got Jaden Daniels. Well, what you're going to get to see is Caleb Williams going to have the weapons that Jaden Daniels actually had, or I should say the game plan that Jaden Daniels had last year, where he actually has guys he can get rid of the ball quickly to, easy reads when teams come to blitz, when teams show him different fronts. He's not going to look confused. He's not going to have no idea where to go with the ball. He's actually going to have guys who can beat people off the line of scrimmage consistently, and weapons all around in positions where they're actually able to succeed. Luther Burden to me is an absolute steal for this offense, and then you add the fact that they got Loveland, 2 guys who can, like I said, can get quick killings into their routes, guys you can make things happen with screen actions, with different jet sweep actions. You can do all kinds of different things with this offense. This offense is going to be much easier for Caleb to kind of be functional in and excel in, and I think we're going to get to see what everybody was hoping, was crowning Jaden Daniels for being the best of quarterbacks. We're going to see out of Caleb this year.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think it's definitely exciting to see what the Bears are putting around Caleb Williams and what they've done in one offseason. Speaking of rookie quarterbacks, Chase, what do you got?
I'm going with Drake Maye here. Now, he's a guy he's going to turn 23 this season. He's the quarterback 9 right now over on Fantasy Pros Dynasty ranking consensus there. He's the number 16 overall ranked player in Dynasty, but I think the arrow is still pointing up on him. I think he can outperform that. And I think he's going to have a better year this year than he even did last year. If you look at things last year, he scored 15.9 points per game in the 11 games that he actually played the full thing as a starter. He played 13 games, but they took him out after one pass attempt in the last game he played. He really wasn't all there for the first time he played. In the 11 real games he played, he was 15.9 points per game. That put him at quarterback 15 on a points per game basis, right behind Tua and right there with Love and right there with Geno Smith. And he had a better completion percentage last season and a better passer rating than Caleb Williams, who we just talked about, but it was kind of quiet. People didn't really necessarily, I don't think, talk enough about Drake Maye and the job he was doing last year with a much worse supporting cast than what Caleb Williams had in Chicago. For all the upgrades that Chicago's made this year, they still had much better weapons around Caleb Williams than what Drake Maye was working with last year. Now coming into this offseason, they have retooled what was PFF's number 32 ranked offensive line last season. They drafted Will Campbell at left tackle, who I think can be a good franchise anchor there for a long time. They signed Garrett Bradbury, who is an upgrade over what they got out of Andrews last season, even though he doesn't grade out over all that well from last season. And they signed Morgan Moses at right tackle in free agency. So they have retooled the line in front of him in an effort to make that entire offense better. Then they went out, they signed Stephon Diggs, they brought in Mac Hollins, they drafted Kyle Williams and Travion Henderson. He's got a much better supporting cast around him now. I think he's going to actually have a running game this year to fall back on. He's got a full offseason as an unquestioned starter. He's got the second easiest strength of schedule in the league so far, according to Sharp Football Analysis. They're facing the AFC North and the NFC South this year. I think the arrow's pointing up on Drake Maye all the way.
Can I ask a quick question, Chase? Do you think he's going to run as much?
I don't know if he'll have to if that offensive line is performing better. But the nice thing about Drake Maye is that he can run and that he is mobile and he has the ability to take off if things do break down. I don't expect this to all of a sudden be a top half of the league offensive line. I'm just saying it's not going to be number 32 like it was last year. He's still going to have plenty of opportunity where he is going to have to run himself. And with the weapons around him, I like the idea of him on the move a little bit, being able to finally find some people open and maybe pass for bigger chunks. I'm not worried about Drake Maye at all, rushing wise or passing wise.
We all went quarterback. How did that happen? Top risers. It wasn't like we made this a quarterback only position. We just all happened to go quarterback. We're all getting pumped up against on these guys. It's just very interesting. I mean, we all went that route.
Well, we can flip this a couple ways, but Chase, and I hate to do this to you, but I am going to go right back to you because we have one more quarterback to talk about in the top tiers, and he happens to be in the same division you were just talking about, so we don't have to go far for you to keep it rolling.
Yeah, this is my top tier faller, and I want to preface this by saying Josh Allen is still a high level option. Okay, let's not go crazy here just because I'm calling him a faller here. They still returned their entire offensive line, which was a very good offensive line from last year, and it's still Josh Allen. He is going to run. He's going to be able to run the football. You know, he's a better passer than he was early in his career. But this is a team that in the draft now waited until the 5th round to take an offensive player. And when they did, they brought him up in a blocking tight end in Jackson Haas from Georgia Tech there. Then they waited till the 7th round to bring in Caden Prather, who is, I don't know, maybe Keon Coleman light with worse hands and not as good a body control in the air. They didn't do anything to really help him out this offseason. He's lost Amari Cooper. He lost Mac Hollins. I just said Mac Hollins went to Boston to play with Drake Maye. And Mac Hollins was one of his top red zone targets, caught 5 of 7 balls in the red zone for 4 touchdowns. He was very reliable, a nice safety outlet for Josh Allen in the red zone down there. So now he's going into this season with Khalil Shakir as his top target, who was the number 22 ranked PFF ranked wide receiver last season. Keon Coleman, who was number 63. And, they brought in Josh Palmer. He was number 66 last season. He still has Dalton Kincaid around. Dalton Kincaid graded out as tight end 14. And Dawson Knox was tight end 53. I mean, there are no elite options on this offense for him to throw to, okay? And to kind of go along with that and piggyback off of that, Josh Allen's points have been in decline now as the pass game usage has declined in Buffalo. This is a team that over the last 4 seasons has trended to running the football more or relying more on the football and passing the ball less compared to the rest of the league. 4 years ago, 2021, when he scored over 400 fantasy points, they had the 5th most attempts in the league as a team. He had the 4th most attempts as a single passer in the league. The next year that dropped to 14th in the league. The next year that dropped to 16th in the league. Last year, the Buffalo Bills attempted the 26th most passes in the NFL. They were 6th from the bottom, folks. They are running the ball more. They're asking him to throw less. And his best fantasy seasons came when he was throwing the ball more. You cannot count on this guy to get double-digit touchdowns for a 3rd straight year. That's only been done by one other dude, and it's Jalen Hurts, and we all know how he gets the double-digit touchdowns every single season. That ain't how Josh Allen's used. He's getting older. He's still in his prime for a quarterback. He's still fine. He's still an elite level option, but he's starting to fall off just ever so slightly. This might be one of those cases where you can still get a haul for Josh Allen. You need to evaluate your roster, figure out, is it worth the haul that I can get for him now, as opposed to what I might be able to get for him later if he has a down year and if his production and his numbers and his counting numbers continue to slide back. Don't count on those rushing touchdowns to keep carrying you with Josh Allen.
Just to push back on that a little bit. I mean, Josh Allen has either been the QB 1 or 2 overall every single season since 2020. Yes. So I just wanted to put that out. Like,
yeah,
maybe the pass numbers come down, but this does not really affect his fantasy status at all. And I understand what you're saying about the double-digit rushing touchdowns, but the Bills are the one other team in the league who do run the tush push, especially in the red zone. Now, it's not as effective. I don't know why they don't do it in the same kind of uniform way that the Eagles do, but because Allen's so big, he still makes it work. I wouldn't bet against Josh Allen rushing for 10 touchdowns again this season. Because I think it's more likely, the flip side of this, James Cook doesn't get 18 rushing touchdowns than it is Josh Allen getting less than 10 this season. So I think there's a little correlation there between those two. So I don't know. I just had to push back a little bit.
That's fair. And look, I think that this is the good point to bring up when it comes to fallers. They're still in the top tier, right? So these aren't guys that we're taking out of being elite. These are guys who, hey, like just based on the draft, based on the offseason, little knock based from where they were. For example, my guy, Nico Collins, not killing him. Still going to be a really good receiver for you. For me, I just think there's a lot of compounding things here. Look, you traded away Laramie Tunzel. You did sign in some new tackles, and you know that's great. I don't think that any of them are better than Laramie Tunzel, and your offensive line was still a really big issue for you. So that's the first part of it. Second part of it is just what they've done at the offensive receiver position. They've invested a ton. They went out, they traded for Kirk, obviously going to be hurt for a good portion of the season. When they draft Knoll, they're hopeful to get Dell at some point. They draft Higgins. They've just invested a lot around him. And again, I don't think that any of those players do what Nico Collins does, which is goes down the field, but that goes hand in hand with the offensive line not getting much better. If in fact, I think it probably got at least a little bit worse for a guy who he relies on the big play. This is a guy who's, flirted around the 100 target mark for a while now. He's someone who you're living on touchdowns in the big play. So if they have the ability to be a little bit more conservative and throw the ball shorter, this isn't an offense that is throwing crazy amounts of pass attempts. I mean, the career high for CJ Stroud at this point is 532, and his career high touchdowns is 23. So, I mean, there's just so much to go around that if they're able to get a little bit more conservative and let one of the best, if not the best defense in the NFL kind of win them games, this is like the opposite of the Chiefs situation where they can let that side of things kind of live for them. Also, have what could be good run attack if same thing. The offensive line's able to carry it for him. So, not killing Nico Collins, just someone who I don't know that the ceiling is quite what it was for portions of the last couple seasons.
I unfortunately have to shut my mouth on Nico Collins for at least one season because I was dead wrong about him last year. So I'm going to shut up about him for 1 year. But if I wasn't shutting up, I would agree with Adam.
Yeah, that's why I'm not killing him. Think he's going to be very, very efficient with the targets he does get. I just don't know that the ceiling is there for him to, completely blow it off the way that he has been. Let's keep it Dan, to you at the wide receiver position with Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Yeah, so I guess we have to kick this off with the obvious part, right, that everybody's been talking about, which is, and it's a very true point, is the overall scheme fit with the addition, of course, of Cooper Kupp. I mean, JSN he's not just primarily a slot receiver. He had the second highest slot rate in the entire league last season. Cooper Kupp himself was actually 18. So we do know Kupp, he also likes to be in the slot quite a bit himself. And just given Jackson Smith-Njigba's age, I'm going to lean towards the idea that he will be the one who gets moved to the outside, moved to that flanker position more often than Cooper Kupp would be. Again, just given his age, because we don't exactly know where Cooper Kupp is in his health status, what he can give. Did he lose a step? Can he still beat, press man coverage on the outside? We don't really know after what we saw in the downtrend of the second half of last season. So I lean towards the idea of maybe JSN taking over that role. But it was so few and far between that JSN actually lined up on the perimeter. Do you know he didn't even have 100 routes run on the perimeter as a receiver last season? That's how often this guy was lining up in the slot to get that extra separation off the line, because he doesn't get great separation when he is in press man coverage, even though it's not very often, again, because he's not on the perimeter, but he doesn't get open very often. I think he was actually 81st in separation score, according to Fantasy Points data this past year. Even Cooper Kupp, who we all don't know what he has left, was much significantly better than that. He was actually in the top 40 in separation score. There's a lot of questions I have about JSN. How is he going to fit? What is his true talent really? I mean, the most route runs in the entire league. Now you look at Kubiak. He's a good coordinator. I actually do trust this guy. I liked what I saw of the Saints, and I know the Saints, everybody seems to forget the first couple of weeks of the season before they got injured on that offensive line. We thought the Saints were going to be the surprise team of the year because of what they were doing offensively. Here's another thing I want to add that's tricky about the scheme aspect here. Kubiak doesn't run a lot of 3 receiver sets. So you're talking about a team that may not even run a ton of 11 personnel. I mean, the Saints were 31st in the amount of times they ran 11 personnel in the league last year. Now, you could say part of that was due to talent, sure, but that's also part of the scheme. It's not heavy on that 3 receiver sets. So you're even talking about, even if JSN and Cooper Kupp are out there on the same field at the same time, neither one of them might be lining up in the slot for all you know. I don't love the scheme fit here if JSN's going to become the perimeter receiver. Now, if Kubiak surprises us and says, you know what, I do trust Kupp more on the perimeter, I am going to focus JSN more in the slot position, then maybe this changes to some degree. But this is not an elite level wide receiver, somebody who's being ranked as wide receiver 14 in consensus right now. This is not where his talent is. We have Sam Darnold, who, did well last year, but fell apart at the end of the season. Has a much longer career of not doing well than doing well. So there's a lot of questions I have about JSN and this overall scheme fit with the personnel.
No, I think that's completely valid. I mean, I don't think this show has always been the highest on JSN in general, so not a surprise to talk about him. But a player who we have talked about and liked, I think even a little bit earlier than maybe a lot of people. Chris, what has you down on Kyron?
Well, I mean, I think this is the second year that we go into a post-draft. Look at what they did at the running back last year. Didn't necessarily affect them, so we all expected it to, but it didn't. But Blake Corum got drafted as a high pick last year. You follow up with good Jacuz Hunter this past year out of Auburn, of similar build, and then you look at the fact that Kyron's in the last year of his deal in the Rams. So to me, it makes it feel like, well, the Rams don't have an intention of paying you. And if they want to play hardball and you want to hit the free market, while some of the guys were first ahead of him, Adam, who else is really going to be banging on Kyron Williams' door? A guy who ran a 4.6 40 in the combine, a guy who is undersized, a guy who isn't a great pass protector, and had a lot of his kind of flaws hidden by Sean McVay. So there's a lot of things that are going to kind of count against him, especially going forward in Dynasty. And to me, Kyron Williams is one of the ultimate. You got to sell what you can for him before you start seeing him getting siphon touches throughout the season. Maybe they run him into the ground this year, so there might be some holding on and maybe it's waiting for that to happen. But I'd be really surprised with the Blake Corum draft pick last year not getting any playing time again this year. And then with 2 extra backs, like I said, that's a lot of guys to be sitting on the bench. I'd be very shocked if he gets the same kind of amount of touches as he did last year. And you saw that offense kind of fade, especially in the running game, was just kind of struggling throughout the season here and there. So I do wonder for Kyren Williams if he has a good season as it is, but he's definitely one of the fallers after this post-draft in my books.
Yeah, no, it hurts. It hurts. I love Kyren. But no, I definitely understand where you're coming from. They keep investing at the position, and that can definitely be a bit of a tell. So if we want to kick it off to our mid-tier, we can keep on that same train. All right, so into the mid-tier, this is another one that is kind of sparked by transactions. We're back over to the risers. And this is Isaiah Pacheco with a lack of real moves at the running back position that I think we all kind of, half expected that there'd be something, whether a late round pick or something in free agency or just any kind of movement from the Chiefs at the running back position. But outside of Elijah Mitchell and to me, the most compelling name is undrafted free agent Rashard Smith, there just hasn't been any change. So to me, that has kind of signified a confidence in Pacheco getting kind of back to form, right? Because they're the only ones that truly know that, them and Pacheco, and that they haven't made any real moves or real reactions, to his health. I would tend to believe that, they're confident that we're going to get at least, a lot closer to a healthy Pacheco than we got at the end of the last season for the playoff run. Because I think we can all agree that they were pretty heavily negatively impacted by their inability to run when it comes to the end of the season and the playoffs. So if they're willing to run it back, then I would imagine they're confident. And I don't think, I mentioned Mahomes as a positive and someone that, I was hoping they would throw a little bit more this upcoming season. I think he'd benefit from that, to be honest with you, just not being worked into the ground and being someone who, could benefit from, having lighter boxes and, things of that nature. So from a mid-tier guy, someone who is currently outside of the top 24 running backs in Dynasty, I do still think that he has some value to give at this point.
Give Rashard Smith some credit. He did get drafted in the 7th round, Adam. He wasn't an undrafted free agent. He did get signed.
my apologies. But same point. He is the most exciting and the only one that I would be afraid of if I had Pacheco. So either way. But all right, cool. We can keep it at the running back position, Dan, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. So it's really funny because Chase Brown leading up to the draft, dynasty sell. They're going to take somebody. They're going to sign somebody. They don't want him to have the full workload. Zach Taylor said that at the combine. And then they added Samaje Perine back. They brought back Zach Moss. I do like Taj Brooks, who they drafted, but they still spent a 6th rounder. It was still a late day 3 pick at the end of the day on Taj Brooks. So how much is he definitively going to play, have the opportunity to play? I mean, that's all kind of up in the air. Chase Brown made out, man. Like, there's no reason to doubt that. Is he going to get 83% of the carries with 15% of the target share that he had last season? Probably not. I still venture that they try to find a way to cut it down there a little bit. But when I'm looking at the competition here, and I'm looking how this team, frankly, is going to have to win games airing it out with the offense, I don't think 70% is off the table, where I didn't think it was going to be that high, frankly. So if we're going to talk about Chase Brown, with his explosiveness on a good, high-scoring offense, getting the ball that much of the time, which would be a top 12 usage, well, then this guy still might be a top 12 running back, frankly. And I don't think that's something we all really expected it to be. Remember, he was the RB8 from week 9 on once he got his start. Like, this was an elite running back for fantasy football purposes. And if he just loses a little bit of the touches, I don't think that's really going to hurt him from still being on that borderline RB1, RB2. And considering we all had him as a sell candidate, this was a huge offseason for Chase Brown.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I actually think that we'll talk about this maybe later, maybe next week even. But I think he might be one of the best values in Dynasty right now. So love the pick. Let's go ahead. And Chase, we have stayed the course at the quarterback position, our last soldier kind of in that race. So Chase, who do we have to talk about next?
Yeah, I couldn't move away from quarterbacks here that I saw moving up in my eyes. And my riser in the mid-tier here because I'm in all Superflex dynasty teams here, is Geno Smith of the Las Vegas Raiders. Pete Carroll and the Raiders are trying to do for the Raiders franchise what Pete Carroll and Geno Smith did for Geno Smith's career 3 years ago. They're trying to resurrect it and bring it back to, to some kind of prominence here. And, hey, Pete pulled his strings. He got Geno Smith into town. Then they promptly signed him to a contract extension. So they've got him through 2027 if they want him here now. It's a guy who's coming off a Seattle record for passing yards in a season, Seattle record for pass completion percentage in a season, but still wasn't a guy that I was real optimistic about coming into this season until the move to bring him to Las Vegas there. And then the draft happened, and we saw kind of what they've done to try and set this guy up for some success here. Geno Smith's been one of the most accurate passers the past 3 seasons. He's been 4th in completion percentage over the past 3 seasons. He's been 1st in on-target throws percentage. So he's got that going for him. He's played really well, better than I think anybody ever thought that he really would play when he first came to Seattle. Seattle had the PFF number 31 offensive line. I just talked about how terrible the offensive line was in New England. It was just about as bad in Seattle here. Moving to Las Vegas, that's an improvement there. The Las Vegas line played much better in the second half of last season than it did in the first half of last season. They were getting better. They bring everybody back from that line. Plus they added a couple of 3rd-round offensive linemen there to try and, to bolster the depth there. They are working to try and build that line and make that team strong on the inside there. And, now Geno Smith gets to go to having Brock Bowers as a target, Jacoby Myers, and then they drafted Ashton Genty, so he'll have a run game to speak of there. They brought him in Jack Besh, who can be a nice kind of possession receiver for him, where Bowers is trying to create mismatches all over the formation, and Jacoby Myers is doing what Jacoby Myers does. Besh can be that kind of move the sticks kind of possession guy. And then they brought in Dante Thornton. He and Trey Tucker can blow the top off of the defense and take it deep. I like the way that all of these pieces can complement each other, and I think that bodes well for an accurate passer like Geno Smith to be able to do some damage. This is not a guy that I'm thinking is going to be a quarterback 1 again. He's not going to be a number 5 overall like he was 3 years ago. But this is a guy who was quarterback 14 last season, and I think can repeat as that high to mid end are quarterback 2 in your league when other people maybe aren't thinking of him as such. I think he can still hit that kind of thing. And so a guy that I was pessimistic on coming into this offseason, I'm much more likely to take a shot on, maybe try to grab if I'm in one of those 2 quarterback leagues. And I'm that team that everybody says, man, if that team just had a second quarterback, well, he can be your second quarterback because I think you can get him at below cost, but I think he's got a great opportunity here in Las Vegas.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. At least, look, I think he's someone who should outperform what he's being valued at, right? Being behind like the likes of Jackson Dart in terms of value, who I mean, well, I'll talk about shortly, but someone who I certainly would much rather have Geno Smith. But first, let's finish it off. Chris, who do you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Calvin Ridley. Going into the draft, he had no quarterback. He actually might have a quarterback in Cam Ward. They added 2 receivers who I think are more role players. And this offense, how it's set up right now, reminds me of what Jane Daniels walked into Washington last year. We saw Terry McLaurin thrive in that role of being the true number 1. We know that Calvin Ridley led the league in air yards last year. This year, he could be the primary number 1 receivers. Clearly, as obvious is going to happen. Tyler Lockett's pretty much Taj Boyd punt 2.0 again. So we already seen this kind of happen. He's not going to steal touches. And I think the better role players in the sense where you have a guy you got out of Florida who has some speed. You got Ayo Manor that out of Stanford who also has some speed but can block as well. But you got 2 guys that have big bodies, outside receivers. That means Calvin Ridley's going to be that kind of move receiver. We saw Jamar Chase have outstanding usage last year in that role. Calvin Ridley can have a similar boost with that, with having an actual quarterback who can throw him the ball. So I think Calvin Ridley's one of those guys, that mid-tier guys that people are kind of, was getting older, didn't have a great season, maybe writing them off. I think he's one of those guys that you want to get your hands on because he had one of those great seasons this year and could still be the one going into next year as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Look, I mean, I think one of the biggest knocks on Ward right now would be that, you've got him and nothing, right? You've got Ridley and nothing. But on the flip side of that, Ridley has nothing really that you care too much about to compete against. So he should get a ton of volume and, definitely a good situation for him. Moving on to fallers, and I will kick it back to I was talking about with Jackson Dart. So I'm going to talk about Tyrone Tracy on a team that, candidly, I think might be one of the biggest dumpster fires in the NFL this season. I like Tyrone Tracy. I really do. But candidly, one of the only moves that I feel like good about the Giants having made this offseason is bringing in Cam Scatterbo. Someone who, candidly, I think does, other than being, the explosive runs, I think probably does everything as good or better than Tracy. You look at Tracy, the converted receiver. Scatterbo was an extremely prolific receiving back in college, and he's a good power back and run between the tackles. Tyrone Tracy, for being a converted wide receiver, has a bigger frame. He's like 220. I think the scariest part of this is we saw that they weren't fully committal to Tracy, just I think in large part because he had fumbling issues, and that's something that can get you benched and does get you benched in the NFL, especially for a team that candidly is going to have a lot of other things working against it. I mean, this is, by pretty much any metric you're going to look at, one of the worst offensive lines in the league. You've still got Malik Neighbors and a bunch of nothing at receiver. You've got the receivers outside of Hyatt and one other guy are all slots. And you've got hot potato at quarterback where, I mean, if you told me that 3 different guys started at quarterback for you this season, I wouldn't be that shocked. So on an offense that I think is just going to have a lot of negatives, a lot more negatives than positives. I mean, the only positive on your offensive line is Andrew Thomas, who has played 16 games over 2 seasons. Don't know, what week 1's going to look like. You should get him back at some point. But again, who knows? The whole thing is just kind of a cluster. And I think for a back that has had some fumbling issues, and they just drafted another back who overlaps quite a bit, it's hard to really feel like you came out of this offseason very good. All right. Chris, I'm going to go back to you since I've been leaving you for relatively late. I mean, this is one of a guy who got crushed on draft night. I mean, one of the bigger surprises. Chris, what do you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Jalen McMillan. Going into the draft, you had some confidence. He's at least number 3 receiver, a guy who scored 7 touchdowns to end the season. You're feeling pretty good that even if Godwin comes back healthy, Mike Evans getting a little older, you got 2 guys who are both in their 30s, so you're feeling good moving forward. And then they go and get Emeka Egbuka in the first round, and you pretty much have no idea how you're going to get on the field the next 2 years, basically, maybe even longer. Your slot position that you can be, targeted. We saw Kate Otten be featured in that role. We saw Chris Godwin get featured in that role. That slot, slot receiver sees a lot of targets in the offense, particularly from Baker Mayfield. So you got a guy who now basically has been pushed out of that role, maybe pushed out on the outside for moving forward as well. And even out there, it depends whether or not they bring back Mike Evans back moving forward, who we know Mike Evans is Tampa Bay. Basically, it should be a buck for life, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward. A lot of people are speculating that Chris Godwin's not as healthy as they think he is. I haven't heard anything contrary that his recovery is going bad or anything along those lines. I think it's all speculation. It's the big fact is that Michael Bucco is one of the guys that they really liked, and they think that they can continue to have weapons around Baker Mayfield, and they want to have as many options as possible. So I think when it comes down to it, Jalen McMillan was a guy that was trending up, but post draft is definitely one of the big fallers in my book.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel you. I mean, again, one of the bigger surprises, hard to see what's going to happen.
And they got Tez Johnson, by the way.
Yeah. And that's going to be the game changer. No, this wide receiver room is a tough one to parse out, but I do think McMillan is someone who a decent chance is kind of one of the odd ones out. So no disagreement here. Dan, I want to kick it to you because you have a name written down. I'm curious if that is still your choice or with recent news, if that's changed perhaps.
Yes. What's funny is, we put this outline and, obviously before 5:30 this morning when the George Pickens news dropped and my follower from Dynasty was going to be DK Metcalf. It's still going to be DK Metcalf. Now, just to reiterate from the beginning of the show, the things that I laid out, because I laid out a lot of the points then. Arthur Smith has not had a wide receiver finish better than wide receiver 43 on a points per game basis since A.J. Brown in 2020. Metcalf himself has not finished in the top 12 since 2021 in a better situation than he's in right now back when he was over in Seattle. And we also talked about the hypothetical of what happens if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign this year. But that's all this year. This is a dynasty faller. The Steelers have not been able to get the quarterback position right since Big Ben has left. They might be waiting for next season. That's fine. It doesn't mean the Steelers are going to get it right because it's been one fail after another with that organization. Mike Tomlin is offensively allergic at the end of the day, whether it's Matt Canada, whether it's Arthur Smith, doesn't matter who. This is a guy who's like, yeah, I'll ride with Mason Rudolph because I can make the playoffs and play defense, and I'm okay with that. I don't trust a team like that to actually draft a good quarterback. I'm sorry, I don't. All right. So it's not looking great for DK Metcalf this year. A little bit better now with George Pickens gone because we might be funneling more volume his way, which is gold in an Arthur Smith offense because there's so little of it to begin with. But I don't know that this situation gets better. Even if Rodgers does sign, what happens next season? If Rodgers signs and this team makes the playoffs and they're picking back in the 20s, it's a good quarterback class. It ain't that good where there's going to be a franchise guy back in the 20s sitting there available for you. So I will still keep Metcalf there as a faller, especially from a dynasty standpoint when he's being ranked as wide receiver 21 in consensus. I have him more as a wide receiver 31, 10 spots lower in dynasty.
I mean, it's harsh, but I can definitely see where you're coming from, at least from the aspect of like, if Rodgers doesn't sign, this year's going to suck. If Rodgers does sign, the future kind of sucks. Like it's a difficult situation. I really like to believe in the talent, but I definitely, certainly understand where you're coming from.
Chris, you can play devil's advocate real quick, but it's Rodgers is still better than Mason Rudolph. But go ahead, Chris.
I'm not arguing that he is or he isn't. What I'm arguing is Calvin led the league in air yards last year. Mason Rudolph was the guy who targeted him more so than Will Levis ever did, and that was a big part of why he got the targets that he did. And if you go back to DK Metcalf's usage and Arthur Smith's usage, and you keep alluding to A.J. Brown was last time he was good. DK Metcalf profile is the closest to A.J. Brown's receivers he's had in the last couple of years. Drake London is not A.J. Brown. People wanted that to happen. That's not the case. So he actually has a guy that kind of fills that role. So I am very curious to see even who the quarterback is. And then real quick, Pittsburgh's receivers also have been pretty well fed despite all the quarterback issues. We know Pittsburgh receivers pretty consistently in fantasy. We knew Deontay Johnson was. We knew Calvin Pickens. We knew Pickens. We knew, back in the day, we had Antonio Brown. So we have different guys that we've seen be productive despite having Delvin Hodges be quarterback at points and despite having, et cetera, just shit quarterbacks we've seen through Pittsburgh.
Pickens was wide receiver 43 on a points per game basis last year with Arthur Smith. We haven't seen wide receivers consistently be fed under Arthur Smith, period. That's who the offensive coordinator is now. And only one guy was getting fed in Matt Canada's system, which is better than we get with Smith. But DK Metcalf is nothing like A.J. Brown. The physical beast, sure, but he doesn't run the same type of patterns. He's not the same type of wide receiver. I don't think they're the same guy. I think Drake London is closer to A.J. Brown than DK Metcalf is. Like, you're talking about a totally different type of wide receiver. And even with Calvin Ridley, getting air yards last year, it still wasn't good enough to make him more in a wide receiver 3 for the season.
All right. Well,
I think DBK's. I'm not going to counter back. That's just my counter where I think I just questioned.
All right. Well, Chase, I'm going to kick it over to you. I let Chris break my heart at the end of the top tier. I've allowed you to do the same here at the end with the last mid-tier faller.
Yeah, this is a guy that I didn't want to be pessimistic on necessarily, even though I'm a Packer fan. But it's DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears for me. He is a guy that's falling right now in my estimation. This guy that, Chase, he was the wide receiver 16 overall last season. And he's got Ben Johnson coming in to be his new offensive coordinator. Yes, I understand all that. But here's the thing. DJ Moore saw 140 targets last season. He scored the fewest half-point PPR points per game of any top 20 wide receiver. He only scored 11.1 points per game. That was the lowest of anybody in the top 20. He had a career low in yards per reception of only 9.9 yards per catch last season. That was the lowest of any wide receiver in the top 40 fantasy scorers last season. Okay. Now Ben Johnson's coming in and that's fueling a lot of optimism here for what DJ Moore's usage is going to be. I think everybody's like, oh, maybe he'll be the new Amon-Ra St. Brown for Ben Johnson here. And yeah, I could have maybe seen that happening, but here's the thing. Then they went out and they drafted Luther Burden, and then they went out and they drafted Colston Loveland. Then they went out and they drafted Luther Burden. maybe that opens more up for a little bit better depth of target having Ben Johnson around. But it also increases this competition for targets. And in terms of taking that Amon-Ra St. Brown role in Ben Johnson's offense, DJ Moore's, in his time with the Bears, has spent about 80% of his time on the outside as opposed to in the slot. Luther Burden spent about 80% of the time in college in the slot. Luther Burden is a slot receiver. That's what he is, and that's what he's going to be. Maybe they use him as in a little bit of a gimmick role, but that hasn't necessarily been something we've seen before out of that Ben Johnson role, in my opinion. I don't think that we've seen that from a wide receiver in that role. So you've got Moore, and everybody wants him to be that new Amon-Ra for Ben Johnson's offense, but I just don't necessarily know that it's a one-for-one translation, and you have to count on him getting 140 targets again to try and be a volume receiver again. I don't see that happening. DJ Moore is 28. He still has a few prime years left, but he's approaching that wide receiver drop-off age, especially in regards to his trade value. People start seeing that age creep up, and they're willing to give you a little bit less regardless of what the dude is necessarily doing on the field here. His contract doesn't have any guaranteed money after 2026. They already have an in-house replacement in theory, in Luther Burden, they said, is what everybody's saying. But I just don't see it for DJ Moore here where he can repeat, where he can be a top flight receiver. I think he's a lower end wide receiver too, because there's just too much competition for targets there. And I think that Burden and Loveland are going to eat into some of the kinds of things that we would have liked to have seen DJ Moore do there in Chicago.
It hurts to hear, but I definitely, again, understand where you're coming from. There's a lot of mouths to feed there, so someone's got to lose out at some point. But all right, we're gonna move on to our low tier, our sleeper guys.
Well, actually, we're gonna have to cut the show there for the main show. But if you come back to the post show on Operation Domination Football Podcast, we're gonna talk about the sleeper guys there, which you can download on your favorite podcast app. Make sure you're checking out our YouTube channel, the Fantasy Football Advice Network, at FF Advice, where you can get FF Advice Net, where you can get all of the content we have laying out for you throughout the network here. It's great stuff constantly. I know this is kind of like the downtime. Definitely not the downtime. Dynasty, best ball, we have it all. So make sure you check us out over there as well. Guys, we'll be back next week with another episode, and make sure you check out the post show on your podcast app. We'll see you soon. Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.